Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. We're just going to wait about 1 more minute until everyone arrives and then we'll get started. So let's just give it 1 more minute. Okay, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Alexander and I'll be your MC for the webinar, which we've titled Scopus Talk on Addressing the Challenges of Predatory Publishing, the Malaysia chapter. So as you may know, this has become a hot topic and we believe that it's a service to the entire research community to come together and discuss this in quite some detail. Today, we're blessed to be joined by several guests, starting with Dr. Wim Meester, who's the Director of Product Management of Scopus Content. I've worked a long time with Wim, and nobody in the world knows more about Scopus vision and policy for content indexing than Wim, so we definitely have the right person to join us for that aspect of today's talk. But we also have some other fantastic guests that we thank very much for joining us. We have Professor Zoraida Abdul Manaf from UITM, who we all know affectionately from the many years that she served at MOHI at MCC. We have Professor Dato Dr. Zulkifli Idris, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research at University Putra Malaysia, UPM. We have Professor Dr. Ahmad Ziad Sulaiman, who is the Senior Director of Research Management at UMK. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for being here today. The agenda is quite simple because the topic is not quite as simple as many people think. So we wanted to keep it relatively straightforward in terms of the format. So Wim will start us off with a 25-minute presentation, and that will be followed by a panel discussion, which I will moderate. Should there be time left, our guests will address some of the questions that are in the Q&A box. The session is also being recorded, so it can be viewed later, and we will share the contents that are being presented today by Monday. So without further ado, let's get started with Wim's presentation. So Wim, I'll stop sharing and the floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sander. Thank you for the kind introduction and also welcome everybody to this webinar. It's great to see so many people attending today's webinar and being able to join this on such a short notice to talk about this very important topic around the high quality content that we have covered in this database. As Sandra already said, we don't have a lot of time, but it is a very complex and interesting topic. So without further ado, I will jump into the agenda right. So what we're going to do today is talk about how Scopus covers high quality content in the Scopus database. After that, I will go over predatory publishing and publication more practice, how Malaysia is doing, and I will end with some comments on also recommendations of how we can prevent publishing in predatory journals. First, the power of Scopus with trusted coverage of high quality content. Here you can see the actual model that we're using, the data model that we're using for the Scopus database. Today we have more than 81 million documents in the Scopus database, linked all together with 1.4 billion cited references. All of those documents are being profiled in different affiliation profiles and different author profiles, 60 million author profiles and 70 affiliation profiles. And all of that content is coming from 7,000 publishers, either via serial titles such as journals and book series and conference series, but also 250,000 books. And through this model, it is possible in Scopus to see what research has been done, what the impact of that research is, who has done that research, and where that research has been taken place. This is the overall mission that we have at Scopus. Help the world of research make high-value decisions with confidence. And in order to do that, you need a database of content which you can trust and which is comprehensive. So in order to do that, we have an independent Conte Selection Advisory Board. This board consists of 17 different subject chairs who are experts in different subject fields, and they make decisions about which journals are included in the Scopus database or not. They use a set of selection criteria that are as well as quantitative as qualitative, and based on that they review all the title suggestions that come in. Scopus doesn't have the aim to cover everything. Here on the slide you can also see there's more than 100,000 scholarly journals out there, and of that around 24,000 journals are included in the Scopus database. That means it selects those journals that are relevant to be included in the database because they provide content which is published according to international publishing standards, and that the content is of high enough value to be included and relevant for the international audience. So basically, the Scopus mandate is to create that data set which is representative and curated of scholarly content. We do that by selecting journals on journal level based on journal level data performance. We're also monitoring the journals that are in the Scopus database to make sure that those that are predatory or below standards are taken out. But there's also some things that I want to explain that we're not doing or where we don't take the responsibility of with Scopus. That is the editorial decisions of the quality of individual articles that are published in those journals that are in the Scopus database. Also the content of those articles, plagiarism or other publication malpractice that might be happening with those individual articles, or disputes about the authorship of the paper are not items that are the responsibility or where Scopus looks into. Those are responsibility of the journal editors or the publishers that are publishing those journals. Only if it's happening on a structural basis or there is on a journal level issues around predatory publishing or publication malpractice, that's where Scopus will take action and take measures on the journal level for that particular journal. So I already mentioned a few times publication malpractice and predatory journals. So now I would like to go over into that topic a bit more. Predatory publishing is not new, but it is really a threat to science, and it is something that is difficult to grasp. It started around 10 years or even longer ago, but the exact size is very difficult to measure. Also, predatory journals may come up, will rise, but also then will disappear again. So the exact amount or the exact identification of predatory journals is very difficult to get hold of. In 2010, it was Jeffrey Beal, who is a librarian in the US, who started a list, the Beal's list, and became an unofficial watchdog of predatory journals. He used his own set of criteria and basically on his own reviews or the opinion of Beal, those journals were going to be listed as potentially predatory, or even complete lists of publishers were listed on that particular list. That doesn't mean that all of those journals that are listed on Beal's list are indeed also predatory or can be considered as such. Because of that, there's also a lot of criticism around that list, because it is very binary and it doesn't give any idea on the level of predatoriness of such journals that are listed on there. Based on that, and after some controversy, in early 2017, the list ceased to exist and is not being maintained by Jeffrey Beal anymore. Since then, the discussion hasn't stopped, and there are different parties that are and organizations that look at predatory publishing. And one is important to mention, which is a group which is headed by some researchers in Canada who came up with a consensus definition of predatory publishing. And there are some links on the slides mentioned here. And if you're interested, you can look into the whole process, how they came to that definition and the exact details of it. But I think the one important thing about that definition is that entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. That's what it is about. That's what defines a predatory journal. And that's also what we're looking at when we're doing reviews in Scopus, to make sure that we identify those kind of journals, and those should not be included in the Scopus database anymore. So what are the driving forces, and why is this happening? Why is there predatory publishing at all? I think the one thing that has to be mentioned is the pressure of many academics to publish, because with the publications that they publish, they have some proof around the output that they do, and based on that, there is career progressions decisions be made. People can get funding, they get recognition of the research. So there's really a pressure to publish as much content as possible. Also, technology plays a role here. With journals putting on a website, it's quite easy to set it up. It's quite easy to reach a lot of people and send out a lot of messages. So the technology really helps those bad actors to set up journals and basically misconceive authors to try to attract them to publish in their journals. Also, the pay-to-publish model or open access model, misusing that is something that these predatory journals do. Because there's an incentive for those journals to have as many manuscripts submitted to them as possible and have them accepted. Because with the more accepted articles they receive, the more revenue they generate and the more money they earn. That means that that model in combination with the technology makes it possible quite easily for bad actors to set up these journals and to mislead or to make misuse of those authors that are maybe not that experienced, or basically that cannot distinguish those bogus journals from genuine journals. So what does Scopus do to address the issue? First of all, I said it already, Scopus takes the responsibility together with the CSAB to curate the content on an ongoing basis to make sure that it doesn't cover any low quality or predatory journals. We do that by continuous monitoring the journals that we have in the Scopus database and re-evaluate those journals that are flagged and for which we have indications that those journals may not meet the selection criteria anymore. Those concerns that we receive or that we see based on the data are being validated, which is a very complex and not always that straightforward, and therefore can also be sometimes time-consuming. And based on that, decisions are being made by the Conte Selection Advisory Board, but also those decisions should not be taken lightly, because of course we want to avoid that predatory journals or poor quality journals are excluded from the Scopus database, but we also want to avoid that legitimate journals still continue to be included in the Scopus database. And also, good articles can still be published in bad journals. So therefore, we want to make sure that we take the right measures for those journals and don't basically get the blame on articles that are published in those journals that are of good quality, but happen to be published in a bad journal. So I mentioned monitoring on an ongoing basis all the journals that we have in the Scopus database, more than 25,000. How do we do that? We have four ways of doing that. The first one is looking at publication concerns. And these are concerns that are coming in from throughout the research community. They come to us from all of the stakeholders that we have. It can be from the Scopus team themselves, it can be from the Conte Selection Advisory Board, it can be from customers, it can be from governments. Like all of the stakeholders or organizations that work with the Scopus data may have feedback about those journals. Those are being sent to us, and that is the publication concerns that we investigate and if validate, take action on. The second category is underperforming. These journals are usually not the predatory journals or the poor quality journals. These are the journals that are still active in the Scopus database, but may have low output, low citations, and maybe high self-citations. So these are journals that are not relevant to be included in Scopus anymore, but are not necessary to be considered predatory. The third category we call outlier performance. And that is really looking at the performance of those journals in Scopus compared to peer journals in their fields and see if there's any indications that there's something happening with those journals which is changing. For example, a steep increase in the number of documents that are produced by that journal, or a sudden change in the author affiliation. If that journal has been publishing for a certain community from a certain country for many years, and then all of a sudden you see a sudden change in the author affiliation, that may be an indication that there is outlier performance, and that could be a reason for flagging those journals for re-evaluation. It's a tool that we call Radar. You might have heard about that one, but that really is looking at that outlier performance. These are usually poor quality journals, but sometimes there's also predatory journals in this third category. The fourth category I'd like to mention is the continuous curation. And that is information that we have around journals at the moment that those journals are being reviewed by the Conte Selection Advisory Board. At that moment, they review the journals based on those 14 selection criteria that we have. And at the time, the journal may actually meet those selection criteria, but there may be reasons or indications why the reviewer of the Conte Selection Advisory Board may have concerns that this may not be sustainable, or that the person thinks, well, this journal does meet the selection criteria right now, but I'm not sure that over time, still the journal will perform at the same level. That kind of information is also collected, and later on we can go back to those journals to do that continuous curation to double check if those journals still meet those selection criteria. And that also brings me to a topic that I didn't mention before, but why are there predatory journals or poor quality journals in the Scopus database to begin with? All of the journals that we have in the Scopus database are selected for Scopus at a certain point in time. They may have been selected by the Conte Selection Advisory Board, or even before the existence of the CSAB, they may have been selected to be covered in our database based on the selection criteria that we had at that time. Usually when journals are included in the Scopus database, it has a positive effect on the performance of those journals. It will attract more manuscripts, therefore it will publish more content. It will also attract more citations, and therefore it increases its impact, which is a very positive thing for the journal. But sometimes that does not happen. It may be that there's a change in the editorial policy. It may be that the journal transfers from one publisher to the other publisher, or there may be other forces at place where, based on that, actually the performance of the journal is not going to be changing for the positive, but the journals may become predatory. And that is what we want to avoid. And those journals we want to discontinue in the Scopus database. And these four mechanisms make sure that we can basically identify those journals for which there is an indication that they could be predatory or low quality, and have them re-evaluated by the Conte Selection Advisory Board. In short, this is how that process looks like. So Scopus monitors, or all of the journals in Scopus are being monitored based on those four categories. Based on that, journals are being flagged for re-evaluation. Those are being reviewed by the Conte Selection Advisory Board, and they make a decision if that journals continue to be covered in the Scopus database or not. And they make that decision based on those same selection criteria they use for new journals to be included in the Scopus database. So it's not different quality criteria they look at this stage. It's the same quality criteria, but they just want to make sure that the journal still meets those selection criteria when they're included in Scopus. This is not a new process or something that we have started recently because we think that journals should be discontinued in Scopus. I already mentioned when I talked about predatory journals, this is something that is happening for many years already. And since around 2016, this is something that we have started to do in a more structured way. And here you can see all the journals that have been re-evaluated during 2016 until 2020, that have been flagged for re-evaluation by the Conte Selection Advisory Board, almost 1,000 in total, and then broken down by the reason of identification, so those 4 flagging mechanisms, and which journals are being discontinued, the ones in the orange box, and which are for the decisions made to continue coverage in the Scopus database. Those are the journals that are indicated in the gray boxes. So based on this, you can see that the basically the catch rate or discontinue rate varies per category. In the publication concerns, so this is the bucket where most of those predatory journals are being captured. There, the discontinue rate is the highest. So 67% of the journals that are flagged for publication concerns that are reviewed by the CSAB in the end are also being discontinued. I think that's very important to realize that those are the journals for which probably there are the most concerns from the research community, and those journals in the end are also being discontinued by the Conte Selection Advisory Board, because those are the journals we want to avoid being included in the data set to make sure that you can trust the data that it is high quality. The other buckets have a little bit of a different discontinue rate, but it doesn't mean that it is less or more important to also stop covering those journals in Scopus. So what happens with those journals when they are discontinued? There's a few steps that we take when the Conte Selection Advisory Boards make the decision to stop covering a journal. First of all, no new content is being added for those journals in Scopus. We put them in a list, which we call the discontinued sources list. And on the bottom of the slide, you can see the link to where that list is being hosted. And in that list, we also put the last content indexed from that journal in the Scopus database. That means any content that is published after that last content will not be indexed in Scopus anymore. Content that was already in Scopus at the moment of the decision that the journal was discontinued will remain in the Scopus database. There are several reasons to do that, and I want to explain that in a bit more detail. The first reason is that the content that is already in Scopus may also be included in the many metrics or analytics reports that we have based on the Scopus database. They may be included in the author profiles, maybe contributing to age indices. They may be included in the CiteScore, and they may be included in any other bibliometric reports that we have based on the Scopus database. For the stability of that and to make sure that those reports remain to be trusted, we keep the content in the Scopus database to make sure that all of those connections are still being made. Other reasons why we keep it in the Scopus database is that, what I said before, not every article in a predatory journal is also to be considered a bad article. There can still be good articles being published in bad journals. And lastly, what I want to say is that a journal that is considered to be predatory or bad quality by the CSAB at that moment in time doesn't mean that it has been predatory or bad during the time that it was covered by the Scopus database. There was a moment in time when a journal was good and then it changed to be predatory. And therefore, we don't want to exclude all of the content that was in the Scopus database before that moment took place that the journal turned bad. There are also some exceptions. In certain cases where there are severe issues of unethical practice, we may want to remove content from the database. But that really is an exception, and we want to make sure that, that we keep the genuine content in the Scopus database listed and that you can trust the Scopus database going forward. So I've been talking about the mechanism of how we select content, how we deselect content. Now I want to show some data on how Malaysia is doing and the content that we have for Malaysian researchers in the Scopus database. First of all, the scholarly output. So this shows the number of articles that we have per year from Malaysian authors in the Scopus database compared to other countries in the slides. So here you can see that Malaysia grown from 2011 with around 20,000 articles per year to around 40,000 articles per year in 2020. A good growth, I think that is a very positive sign. There are some other countries that have relatively higher growth, such as India, Russia, or particularly Indonesia. With higher growth, there are also maybe some issues with that. For example, what I show here is the number of articles that are published in Q1 CiteScore journals. So these are the 25% best journals that we have in their relative subject fields, and the ratio of articles that are published from researchers in these countries in these journals. So around 30% of the articles that we have from Malaysian researchers are published in Q1 journals. So I think that's a very good number. It's quite stable. It could be higher. Countries like South Korea or Thailand have a relatively higher ratio of articles in these Q1 journals. But those countries that I just mentioned that have a very high growth rate may also have a little bit lower rate of publishing in those Q1 journals. Particularly you see that from Indonesia, where the actual ratio decreased from around 30% to now about 10%. Then looking at those discontinued journals. So again, discontinued journals means that these journals are not active in Scopus anymore. It means that some of these journals are predatory, but not all of those journals are considered to be predatory. Here you can see that from 2011 onwards, there has been a growth in the number of articles published by Malaysian authors in these discontinued journals until around 2014, and then it has been relatively stable around 10%. So 10% of the research output from Malaysian authors is in discontinued journals. Again, not all predatory content, some of it may be, but these could also be lower quality journals that are not included in Scopus anymore. That is relatively high compared to other countries. Indonesia and India may have some higher ratio at some points of time. Other countries like Russia, South Korea and Thailand have close to zero in the latest years of ratio of articles that are published in these discontinued journals. Drilling down into that a bit more, I have here a breakdown of the Malaysian documents split out in RU5 institutes and non-RU5 institutes. And there you can see that for the RU5 institutes, relatively fewer articles are being published in those discontinued journals. So apparently the researchers from these institutions relatively more choose to publish in those journals that are not going to be discontinued in Scopus later on. Also, you may wonder, where does this happen? Is this something that is specific to a certain subject area, or is this across subject area? I think this slide clearly illustrates that this is not an issue that is happening for one particular subject area. This happens in all subject areas. And with engineering and computer science as largest, but also other subject areas such as social sciences, mathematics, arts and humanities, energy, economics, and many other fields. In all of these subject areas, it happens that also Malaysian authors publish in those discontinued journals. Now I want to spend not so much time, because I realize we're almost at the end of this session, but say a few words of how this compares to other databases, and particularly Web of Science. Here you can see a comparison of the journals that we have in Scopus compared to the core collection databases at Web of Science. Those numbers in red are the journals that are not in Scopus, but that are in Web of Science. The number in blue is the number of journals that we have in Scopus, but not in Web of Science. There you can see that Scopus has many more journals than Web of Science does. Predatory publishing is an issue that is happening everywhere, and no database is immune, not Scopus and also not Web of Science. But because Scopus covers so many more journals, it does happen that there are more discontinued or more predatory journals in the Scopus database. But still, there are also predatory journals or low quality journals in the Web of Science database. And for example, those journals that are indicated in red, those have been considered for Scopus, but they didn't meet the selection criteria for the Scopus database. So here, those journals are not considered to be good enough or have not been reviewed by the CSAB to be included in the Scopus database. And also, when you look at those journals that are discontinued in Scopus, and here we've looked at 580 journals in total, you can see that some of those journals are still covered by the Web of Science core collection. When you look at the core collection, 99 or 17% of those journals that are discontinued in Scopus are still actively covered in the Web of Science database. So it doesn't mean that this is an issue that is not happening with Web of Science. It's happening with Web of Science as well. They have their own mechanisms and their own policies on trying to identify those journals and potentially also stop them. But they may be slightly different than the procedures that I've explained for Scopus. But what I want to make clear is that predatory publishing is an issue which is general to the whole community. It is something that we as Scopus have to act on, but it's not that it is only happening in Scopus. Everybody in the whole workflow, universities, researchers, and databases need to be aware of this problem and need to act on it. I just mentioned researchers, and I want to finish off with some advice, particularly for researchers. I hope that the data that I showed you before make clear that it's very important for researchers that they publish in the right journals. And you don't need to select a journal because it's covered in the Scopus database. You need to select the best journal that you want to publish in based on the match of that journal with your research. Do your due diligence, and there are several tools for it. Here I have given a link to Think, Check, Submit, but really investigate, is the journal that you want to submit your article to the best journal for your research? Has it the right audience? Has it the right subject areas? Does it have the right editors that you want to send it to? Based on that, you can make a decision to send your journal to send your manuscript to that journal. And I will guarantee that if this is the right journal for your research, if you have looked at the right checklist to make sure that you make the right decision, then it's very likely that that journal will also be included in the Scopus database, because then probably it is a high quality journal. Don't select your journal because it is included in Scopus, but select your journal because it is the right journal, and then most likely that journal is also included in Scopus, and it will be included in all of those metrics, all of those barometric research and analyses that I showed you earlier on. And with that, I'd like to hand over back to Sander and to go into the next part of this webinar.
Thank you very much, Wim, for that insightful presentation. Pardon me. So I guess we'll just kick off with the panel discussion. And to get that started, I have a couple questions, and I would like to start with Professor Zoraida. Hello, Professor Zoraida. So the first question for you is, recently, okay, your audio is, can you say something just so we can hear your voice quickly? Okay, I think her audio is not great, so I'm going to start with Wim, and we'll sort out the technical issue with Professor Zoraida. So, Wim, recently there's been concern about two articles published by Springer Nature, and they seem to claim that Scopus includes predatory journals. So does
I can hear you. No.
include predatory journals, and can you share your views on the claims that were made in those articles specifically?
Yes, absolutely. And I might want to share again something to make it a bit more clear. So indeed, there have been two articles being published quite recently about claiming that there are predatory journals in the Scopus database. There was a Nature news item, which was based on an article published in the journal Scientometrics by two Czech researchers. And that actually is based on a study done in 2017. And the study is about which journals are in Scopus that are listed by Beale. So Beale's list journals.
Okay.
And journals included in or using the Scopus database determine where these researchers are coming from. So from which countries are those researchers publishing in those Beals journals. And I hope that I've made clear in my presentation before that publishing in Beals doesn't mean that all of those Beals journals are also predatory. There's a subset of those Beals journals that are indeed predatory and that should be discontinued, but not all of them. So what we have done already in 2017 is reevaluate all of the Beals journals lists that were in Scopus. And based on that, 65% of those journals were discontinued in the Scopus database. So these includes also those predatory journals. So those journals are not active in Scopus today anymore. And actually, this has sparked a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis also from our side. And maybe an interesting fact to share as well is that actually after that we have done this, also look at the journals that were considered to be predatory at that moment in time and that are still active today. And there you can also see that of those 360 journals, there are still only 120 journals that are active today. So also this shows that predatory publishing or poor quality publishing is a very mobile thing. It is not like static in time that at this moment in time you know exactly which journal is predatory or not. This is changing over time and new journals may arise, but other predatory journals may cease to exist. I think the one important thing is to say is that I think the title of this research is very misleading in the sense that this research is not about predatory publishing in Scopus. This research is about authors publishing in Beal listed journals using the Scopus database to find the origin of where these authors are coming from. And that is a bit similar to those statistics and graphs that I showed you earlier on in the presentation. Sandra, back to you.
Thank you very much, Wim. Moving on, Professor Zul, the question for you.
Yes.
Sorry, I meant Zulkifli Idris.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I can hear you now though, so that I know that your microphone is working properly. And I'll come back to you. I won't forget you. I'm sorry. Professor, who is responsible for curbing predatory publishing, and what role should everyone play in your view? You're muted, sir.
Thank you, Alexander, for the question. I think it's obvious that we urgently need for a collaborative and global effort to curb predatory publishing. And authors deserve the right to protection and a right to hold predatory publishers accountable. If such a protection is not forthcoming, then this will lead to unfavorable consequences. And I feel many parties are responsible to address this problem. First and foremost, definitely the researchers themselves. I think researchers should stop submitting to predatory journals and stop citing papers from predatory journals. So without the quote-unquote support from researchers, the predatory journals will be out of business. Okay. Secondly, the scientific community. The scientific community has to reach a consensus on a comprehensive and reliable definition of what constitutes predatory publishing practices and what constitutes legitimate publishing practices. This, to me, is a first step towards creating protection for authors against predatory fee-charging journals and publishers. And number three, I think that, is the publishers, the reputable publishers. I think they should be the whistleblower on unethical predatory journals and publishers, even if that would call for legal action. Such an approach would promote fair competition, not only for the benefit of credible publishers, but also for the benefit of authors and their institutions. And this would send a clear and strong message to victims and other offenders that predatory journals and publishers cannot prey on authors and make profit out of them. So number 4, I think the institution themselves. Okay, more effort need to be done to increase the awareness among researchers concerning predatory publishing. Predatory publishing should be more frequently discussed during scientific meetings. And I strongly believe that senior professors and mentors should educate students, young researchers, and anyone else interested in learning more about predatory journals. And we have to convey a clear message that what and where we publish matters. And finally, if we look at the scenario in Malaysia and other developing countries, a number of publications has always been a major yardstick of academic performance. For example, to be an associate professor or professor, we need to have X number of papers. The overemphasis on numbers per se may lead certain academics to publish in predatory journal. I believe it is high time that we focus more on quality of and impact of our publications rather than just number. Perhaps total citation, excluding self-citation, is a better measure of scholarly output rather than number per se. Thank you for now.
Those are some interesting thoughts, and you mentioned the role of publishers, and I'm mindful that Elsevier we're both a publisher as well as creating the Scopus database, and I'm wondering what your expectation is of Scopus in helping, let's say, the research office and other departments in a university set the best practices or the right standard around all of this.
Okay, thank you again, Alexander. I believe that the credibility and reliability of citation databases such as Scopus and Web of Science, which we depend on as trustworthy research references, actually are now being called in question because of all these issues. So citation repositories are riddled with poor quality publications in fraudulent journals. Thus, I believe that we urgently need a trusted, high-quality data source that we can rely on. Thus, Scopus and other reputable databases have an important role to play by practicing perhaps a more rigorous and stringent monitoring and evaluation process. I strongly believe that maintaining the integrity and quality of journals indexed on Scopus or other reputable databases should be of paramount importance.
Thank you very much. Let's move back to Professor Zoraida and see if the sound is working now. Professor Zoraida?
Yes, Alex.
Great, I can hear you. So as you know, recently there's been a bit of a spotlight on Malaysia, and you know, there's been a lot of talk about Malaysia publishing more than some other countries in predatory journals. There was some talk that Malaysia ranked 5th in terms of comparison with other countries in terms of the number of papers published in predatory journals. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on this as someone who's worked so long in this field and worked so long at MCC? If you could share your views, please.
Okay, thank you. I guess I consider this as a spicy question, Alex. Okay.
It is.
So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to indicate that this is going to be my personal opinion, and it does not represent the institutions that I'm party to or associated with. I believe the article mentioned has opened the eyes of many parties, especially members of the higher learning institutions, public and private, university administrators, researchers, and definitely the public. And what is obvious to me is that it has to be understood that this is an unobtrusive study, and the research is reliant on statistical data. So readers need to know and understand that there is a huge difference between statistical reality. The article is a very good research work with robust methods So first and foremost, I think the general public need to comprehend the fact that scholars communicate their new knowledge to the mass via formal and informal channels, such as journals, proceedings, books, presentation, discourse, etc. And this whole process, vital and crucial element or attribute of information or knowledge being communicated is its reliability and trustworthiness. Thus, it is mandatory for scholarly publication cycle to undergo a strict peer review process. And the fundamental justification for the process is to achieve high quality or accepted standards of the knowledge discipline. The process will ensure the issues of unwarranted claims, unacceptable interpretations, or personal views are filtered out and will not be published without prior expert review. And ladies and gentlemen, according to a survey on understanding why scholars publish, the highest reason given by the scholar was to disseminate new research findings and knowledge. They even willing to pay to get their intellectual works published. And these circumstances perceived as opportunities to some unscrupulous parties to manipulate the situation even further. The action of these so-called predatory journal publishers are directly ruining the quality process and compromise the quality assurance. Naive readers are not the only victims of these scams, but quite a number of experienced and known researchers have also been duped into submitting to this predatory journal. The issues of predatory journals, as mentioned by Prof. Zul also, is a global threat to the integrity and reliability of scientific information and knowledge production. The predicament is a tragedy to the reputation of scholarly knowledge production, tarnish and ruin the imminence of scholarly communication process. And from my point of view, with the publish or perish culture, lack of awareness about predatory publishing promote and will encourage environment for predatory publication to exist. The nature of survival of predatory journal, quick and fast to adapt policies and procedures changes online, resulted in increasing number of fake publishers to masquerade as legitimate ones. So, as mentioned by Prof. Zul again, researchers need to be more prudent and wise in submitting their intellects. Alex? Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your thoughts. So I would like to go to Professor Ziad and for him to share his thoughts also on, as a leader of the research office at the university, what strategy would you take to prevent the predatory publishing?
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Deputy Vice Chancellor Research of the Innovation of UMK, I would like to thank Elsevier teams for inviting UMK to give these opinions on the the hot topics of this predatory journal. Okay, basically, based on your questions, okay, as a leader in the research office of the university, basically now I'm working as a senior director of the Research Management Center Office in UMK, University of Malaysia, Kelantan. For information at Aramanshi, for example, at research office, basically we provide and prepare something like the research support, for example, like a journal quality indicator, okay, which is to explain, to explain the steps of the publishing in the right journal. Okay, for example, like the predatory publisher checklist, okay, and then the predatory conference checklist, and etc. I think with this journal quality indicator, All right, the researcher will be better guided, where the indicator is divided into 3 sections. Okay, basically, we need to make sure that the academics in the institution basically is understand, which is mains, medium, and minor indicators, by introducing 15 steps for the publication of the quality journal. Yeah. At the same time, at my university, as a research leader, to manage all the research and innovation in the university as well as publication, UMK also provide a special publication incentive, okay, to the researchers who publish the article in the reputable journal only. And then for this UMK, for example, very dedicated to create a special unit, namely publication and rating division, okay, under the research management center office, who are advising, role as a one-stop center, evaluating and processing the potentially journal published to the right journal platform, which is all the reputable journal. Okay, here I need to share with all the participants and maybe all the panels. Maybe the panels can add up some of the point later on. Some of the few initiative strategies implemented at my university at UMK regarding this issue on the predatory journals. I have here about 10. Okay, which is the number one is the collaborative publication incentive, which is we allow the industry, agency, and community together to write a journal and so on. And then postdoctoral, specifically in the publication scheme. And then we have the the research management center office publication talk that we do frequently every month, just to give the informations about the journal, what the predatory or the reputable journal and so on, tips and tools to spot the predatory journal publishers. Okay, check out open access journal quality indicators, retraction watch, a blog that reports on retraction of scientific papers, a bare list of predatory publishers, a bare list of the predatory journals, Scopus discontinued list of journals, and WOS or JCR separation list of journal. I think this is some of the the strategy that we actually at the management office need to emphasize to avoid our academics, our researchers community in the university not involved in the predatory journals. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I think a number of you have talked on the driving forces behind predatory publishing and why there's a rise and what the kind of reasons for this dynamic are. And I'm wondering, Professor Ziad, what do you think about awareness of predatory publishing in Malaysia? Is there a good awareness of what is happening and the pitfalls of it and how to avoid it?
Okay, thank you, Alex, for the second question. I think in terms of the awareness program, based on your question, awareness program of the predatory publishing in the academic community in Malaysia, basically that has been conducted at the university through the research management office as well. Here I share you some of the least awareness activities that were conducted normally in university. Okay, some of the university, they basically like my university at UMK, basically we, as per mentioned just now, basically we always frequently conducting the publication talk, which is we explain in terms of what is actually the Elsevier ebooks workshop. Basically, we enhance the visibility of the scholarly journal, how to publish in high impact journal as per mentioned before. And then basically at the university level as well, we actually we email frequently on the guidelines to check journal index by Scopus. And then we share. We always frequently every month we email discontinued Scopus list awareness, and then the Scopus and WOS index list of journal as well. Basically, a part of that, we're also doing frequently sharing on the awareness of fake and predatory journal, which is we explain actually the charging exorbitant rate for publication of article in conjunction with a lack of peer review or editorial oversight. Okay, and we explain them the notifying of authors of fee only after acceptance, and then targeting scholars through mass email spamming in attempts to get them to publish or serve on editorial board and so on. I think that's all from me, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a very similar question to Professor Zoraida. In your experience with MCC all these years, which is now called the Citation and Infometric Center of the Ministry, in your view, what should Malaysia now do to ensure the quality of the journals that they're publishing in?
Okay, Alex. Well, I think the awareness of publishing quality and impactful journals has been in place in Malaysia way back in 2010. And due to that, a center known as, you mentioned just now, Citation and Infometric Center was established by the Ministry of Higher Education. And this center does not only collate, curate, and index the nation's scholarly output in a repository known as My Journal, but also constantly measure and analyze its performance. Besides that, the center also supports scholarly communication activities and programs to promote and encourage higher productivity, substantial global visibility, reputation, and definitely greater impact scholarly exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in line with the nation's strive to achieve a developed nation status via quality scholarly output. And one of the core and main daily tasks of the center is to assess all journals and scholarly output. All journal submission for inclusion in My Journal will go through a strict screening process prior to acceptance to be indexed in the repository. The assessment includes close observation of full compliance to scholarly ethics. Although the strategic mission of the center is to enhance visibility of the nation's scholarly output, but there is no compromise on quality. Journals indexed in My Journal will be evaluated to be listed at the National Citation Index database named MyCite. So to date, there are 770 journals titled in My Journal, but only 289 are listed in MyCite. Nevertheless, last year, more than 31 journals have been discontinued from MyCite listing due to this is a common practice for any other quality assurance. And in order to ensure continuous support and awareness with regards to scholarly publication best practices shop from time to time. Continuous plus the Malaysia's context effectiveness.
Okay, thank you, Professor Zoraida. So we have just 2 minutes left, and before we close off, I just want to thank all of the speakers for coming today and sharing your thoughts. We very much want to look at how we can support Malaysia in whatever way possible to educate more and to talk and engage around this topic, because as we've seen, it's not quite as simple as some people think it is. It's a very complex topic and changing over time, and we feel it's everyone's problem. So we welcome more discussions around this. To all the audience, thanks a lot for coming. We will send a copy of the recording and the slides to you shortly by email. Should you have further questions that weren't answered today, please feel free to email us, get in touch with us. We're happy to have meetings at your university also to discuss this further if you think that helps. I think with that, unless there are any last comments, any burning things on the minds of any of the speakers, we could probably end the session exactly on time.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for organizing and for bringing this important topic to Malaysian researchers.
Okay, so we'll just do the virtual wave goodbye, and hello everyone. Take care, hope you're all well, and see you around. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Prof. Zul.
Thank you, Prof. Zaid.
Bye.
Thank you, Prof. Zaida. Alex.
See you guys. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, terima kasih, Prof. Zul.